In 2013, in a peaceful neighbourhood called Neutral Bay in Sydney, Australia, a chilling and mysterious case unfolded, one that would leave the world searching for answers. At the centre of this story was a man with a high IQ and narcissistic tendencies who believed he could outsmart the police, even the FBI. Using his intelligence to weave a web of lies, Daniel Kelsall tried to manipulate the investigation at every turn, convinced he could escape justice. But as the police dug deeper, they uncovered the truth hidden beneath his calculated facade. This is a case that still perplexes people, with many questions remaining unanswered, and a story that's both sad and chilling, with a conclusion that feels incomplete. But before we dive into today's case, I just want to remind you to like the video and subscribe if you're new. Your support helps me a lot. Thank you. Meet Daniel Kelsall, a 20-year-old man from Sydney. He was born in New Zealand, near Wellington, in 1993. Daniel was adopted as a baby and grew up in a comfortable, upper-middle-class family. His childhood was good. His parents loved him and took care of him. He was never in trouble, and people who knew him described him as a nice, well-behaved kid. But as he got older, things changed. Daniel started struggling with anger issues, and he became easily enraged. He also battled with depression, which followed him through his teenage years and into adulthood. It is reported that Daniel suffered from depression when growing up shortly after finishing school. Daniel decided to study hospitality at Welltech, but those who met him often found him odd. He was what many would call a geek, awkward in social situations, saying things that seemed strange to others. Despite this, most people didn't find him dangerous. A family friend later shared that Daniel's parents never held back on giving him the best education, hobbies, and vacations. They made sure he had every opportunity in life. But some who knew Daniel growing up noticed something else. His moods could shift suddenly, and he had a quick temper. One person remembered how Daniel would often ask for hugs, a habit that seemed unusual to them. Over the years, Daniel did see a few mental health professionals. It said he was diagnosed with autism, though the full picture of his diagnosis would later reveal something much darker about him, something that would shed light on his twisted, calculated nature. In 2012, when Daniel was around 19, his family moved to Sydney, Australia. They settled in Neutral Bay, an upscale neighbourhood known for its beauty, low crime, and family-friendly atmosphere. It was the perfect place to raise a family. Soon after the move, Daniel started searching for work and found a job at the Sydney cooking school as a cleaner. Daniel also had cooking experience, so he began to learn more about the craft and cook at the school. His co-workers noticed something unusual about him, though. When he first arrived, Daniel made sure to tell everyone that he had autism and had been diagnosed with it. He spoke in an odd way, repeating questions to people as though trying to mimic the behavior of someone with autism. But there was one thing that didn't seem right. People with autism often struggle with eye contact, yet Daniel would stare intensely into people's eyes when speaking to them. In Sydney, Daniel continued to see therapists, where he spoke openly about his new job, which involved working with knives. During these sessions, he revealed something chilling. He shared that he was having disturbing thoughts about killing strangers with a knife during his walks home at night. He even confessed that, one night, he had taken a knife from the Sydney cooking school, hoping to use it on someone as he walked. However, he claimed that he didn't find anyone that night. Yet, his dark thoughts didn't stop there. Daniel kept describing how he craved the thrill of killing someone, a total stranger, always with a knife. So, what would you do if you were in this situation? Would you report these disturbing thoughts to try to stop a possible murder? I'm sure many of you would. But in this case, the therapist did nothing. Their failure to act would prove to be a tragic oversight, one that could have prevented a horrific crime. On September 7, 2013, Daniel was finishing up a shift at the Sydney cooking school. The day had been routine, nothing particularly notable. The school had hosted a birthday party, a group of women learning to cook before sitting down to enjoy their meal. After the event, Daniel's task was simple: clean up and lock the venue. He did so methodically, but just before leaving, something chilling happened. He slipped a knife into his satchel. He walked out of the school and headed toward a nearby convenience store, but something, or rather, someone caught his eye. A 31-year-old man named Morgan Huxley, unaware of the danger that was about to follow him. Morgan was a successful business owner living in Sydney, known for his good looks, charm, and kind heart. He was the type of person who made everyone around him feel at ease. He worked in the boat building industry, landing a lucrative deal that promised to secure his future. On September 7th, everything seemed perfect for Morgan. He'd just celebrated at an engagement party in Lane Cove for his best friend. The night had gone well, a few drinks in, and he was feeling relaxed, unaware that his path would soon cross with Daniel's and that the night would take a deadly turn. As the night came to a close, Morgan shared a taxi with his best friend, Chris, and his fiancée. They lived nearby, but Morgan wasn't ready to call it a night. He suggested staying out for a couple more drinks, but the couple was tired and ready to go home. They politely declined, and Morgan, ever the social soul, wasn't bothered by it. He got out of the taxi, deciding to grab a drink at a nearby convenience store, unaware that Daniel had already noticed him and that a chilling fate was about to unfold. Morgan, barefoot after accidentally leaving his shoes behind at the engagement party, wandered into the convenience store to withdraw cash. As he stood at the ATM, he noticed Daniel and casually asked if he needed to use the machine. Daniel declined. After finishing his business, Morgan walked out, heading for the Oaks Hotel pub in Neutral Bay. He sat down at a small table by the front window, alone, nursing a schooner of beer, unaware that Daniel had begun to shadow him from just outside. He was being watched closely, dangerously. Standing just outside the pub, Daniel lingered in the shadows, his eyes fixed on Morgan through the window. It was around 1 a.m. and Morgan, completely unaware, sat drinking his beer while scrolling through his phone. He sent a quick message to Rebecca, a friend he was supposed to meet earlier that night. He apologized for missing her, blaming his drunken state and the party that had thrown off his timing. But as Morgan typed those words, Daniel's eyes burned with a different intent, waiting, watching, for the moment to strike. Morgan continued to enjoy his beer, blissfully unaware that just a few feet away, Daniel stood frozen, watching him. It wasn't until Morgan finished his drink and stood to leave that Daniel made his move. He was caught on CCTV again, this time moving in sync with Morgan as he exited the pub. Without hesitation, Daniel began to follow him, jogging to catch up. Morgan, still in a drunken haze, never noticed the man trailing behind him, silently stalking him in the night. As Morgan entered his home, it's thought that he accidentally left the front door unlocked. Inside, he slipped on a pair of running shoes, having previously been barefoot after leaving his shoes at the party. This suggests that he had originally planned to go back out, maybe to continue the night. But as he moved through the house, something changed. While Morgan settled in, Daniel waited outside, keeping a close watch. However, not long after, Morgan seemed to reconsider his plans. He left his bedroom door ajar and opened a window, then lay face down on the bed, quickly drifting into sleep. Morgan shared the house with a woman named Jean. In the middle of the night, she was woken by a sudden draft sweeping into her room. It was because Morgan had left his window open. Jean got up and shut her bedroom door to block out the cold. Just moments later, she heard someone knocking at the front door. Jean had been expecting her boyfriend that night, and since he had a key to the house, she assumed it was him. But when she heard the knocks, she figured it wasn't him and decided to go back to sleep. standing outside, knocking at the door, was none other than Daniel. When no one answered, Daniel covered his hand with his clothing to avoid leaving fingerprints on the door handle. He carefully opened the door and stepped inside. As he moved toward the bedrooms, he noticed one door ajar. It was Morgan's room, and inside, Morgan lay fast asleep on his bed. Daniel entered quietly, and as he saw Morgan face down, he climbed on top of him, stripping Morgan of his clothes before touching him inappropriately. This sudden intrusion stirred Morgan, and he woke up. As Morgan came to, Daniel gazed at him for a moment before pulling out a knife from his satchel. In one swift motion, he raised the blade above his head and began stabbing Morgan again and again, repeatedly striking his head, neck, and back. The force of the blows was so brutal that when the knife struck Morgan's skull, part of the blade broke off. With the deed done, Daniel calmly returned the knife to his bag, snatched Morgan's phone, and quietly left the house. Despite the brutal wounds, Morgan was still clinging to life. Summoning every ounce of strength, he managed to drag himself off the bed and crawl toward Jean's bedroom. When he reached the doorway, he let out a series of labored groans that broke the silence of the house. The sound stirred Jean, who rushed out of her bedroom to investigate. As she turned the corner toward Morgan's room, her eyes locked on the horrifying scene before her Morgan lying in a pool of blood, his body savagely mutilated. Shocked and terrified, Jean wasted no time and immediately called for help. The paramedics, on the other end of the line, instructed her on how to administer CPR, which she did in a frantic attempt to save him. Meanwhile, Daniel, unfazed, made his way home, calmly disposing of his bloodied clothes and the knife he had used to carry out the attack. Paramedics arrived swiftly, and Morgan was rushed to the hospital, but despite their efforts, he succumbed to his injuries shortly after arriving. The police arrived at the scene soon after, and the investigation began. Quickly, investigators began retracing Morgan's final movements. They discovered that he had been at a local pub earlier that evening, and they began gathering CCTV footage from around the area. What they uncovered was chilling. In the footage, a man could clearly be seen following Morgan and even watching him intently through the window. It was clear this man knew more than he was letting on. Further scrutiny revealed that the man was wearing chef's clothing, which gave the investigators a crucial lead. They immediately began questioning local restaurant workers, showing them the footage. At the Sydney cooking school, someone finally recognized the man. They confirmed that the person in the video was none other than Daniel Kelsall. Investigators were given Daniel's address and proceeded to visit his home, hoping to speak with him about the brutal murder. When they arrived, they were taken aback by his demeanor. He didn't seem like the type of person they expected to be capable of such a heinous crime. Still, they had to follow through with their investigation before dismissing him. Daniel was brought in for questioning at the police station, where he eventually confirmed that the man in the CCTV footage was indeed him.
No shoes.
No, not to his face. No, that's what.
Sorry, but that's what you said.
The name
to us.
that I had for the person
Correct.
Was, no shoes.
No shoes. Have you ever seen him before?
No.
Never?
Not to my knowledge.
Sorry?
Not to my knowledge, no. I mean, it's possible that I may have walked like cross paths.
But you don't know him?
No.
Why'd you jog?
It's cold. Mum always tells me if you're cold, go for a jog.
How far did you jog for?
Not very far.
How far is not very far?
Oh, maybe. I don't know. From the lights, a little bit after the lights, to a little bit before the opening to the restaurant, the Oaks restaurant. I might be the only person to tell you where my boss was as well, but I'm not very good at remembering things.
Sorry, you're not very good at remembering things.
Not fine details, no.
Where you were, over here on Bimboyd Road, and then you've indicated you've sort of walked back up Military Road, across Watson, if you're cold, I'm just wondering why you would go that way. That doesn't look like the most direct route.
I don't know. I don't, when I get tired, I don't really pay attention to a lot of things. I think it was because I wanted to check in at work, the front of work.
Did you have a bag with you?
Yes, this one.
Thank you. And it's that particular bag?
This one.
So that's a, sorry, what is it? Phillips Fox with a, was it South Africa?
South African soccer team.
It's at the World Cup.
That's, yes, I believe it's the Visa. It's a World Cup leopard.
And do you recall what you would have had in that particular bag?
I would have had a apron.
Yes.
My box of Yu-Gi-Oh trading cards.
Of your what, sorry?
Yu-Gi-Oh trading card game.
Okay.
And that would be it. I might have had a food item, but I'm not too sure.
You've indicated that you have autism, is that correct?
Yes.
What do you mean? What sort?
It hasn't been classified because it was caught so late on in life that I've already adjusted to having it. I haven't taken any concrete tests by my psychologist. I have seen a psychologist and I've been diagnosed with this. I don't actually know what specific level on the autism scale it is, but it does impede some functioning in everyday life.
Like what?
I can't tell balance. I can't tell measurement of any kind. So measurement of time, measurement of object, in any type of measurement, I can't instinctively tell easy enough to. So I can't, like a pinch of salt. I can't continue a same pinch of salt. So you ask me to do 2 pinches of salt, they will not be the same. You ask me to guess your measurement, I would not be able to at all. I wouldn't be able to say you're about this height because I just can't tell.
He referred to him as No Shoes, though he quickly clarified that he never called him that directly. No Shoes, he repeated, as if that name was the only way he could describe the person. When asked if he had ever seen Morgan before, Daniel said, "No, not to my knowledge," he added. "It's possible we cross paths, but I don't know him." "Why did you go for a jog?" the officer asked. Daniel replied, "It was cold." "My mum always tells me to jog when I'm cold." When asked how far he had jogged, Daniel hesitated. "Not very far. I think he couldn't give an exact distance," adding, "maybe from the lights just after the..." To the bit before the opening of the Oaks restaurant, he seemed to struggle with details, adding, "I'm not very good at remembering things, especially the little things." In the interview, the investigator asked, "So you were on Ben Boyd Road, and then you walked up Malachi Road, across Watson Street. If you were cold, why would you take such a roundabout way? That doesn't seem like the most direct route." Daniel hesitated. "I'm not sure. When I get tired, I don't really focus on the details." He paused for a moment, then added, "I think I was trying to check in at work." "IT the front," the investigator asked. "Did you have a bag with you?" Daniel replied, "Yes. This one." He pointed to the bag, confirming, "Yes, this particular one." The investigator then asked, "Sorry, was it Phillips Fox? You had something related to South African soccer. Was it a World Cup thing?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, I believe it's the Visa." "A World Cup leopard?" He seemed unsure, but continued, "And yes, it was a World Cup item." The investigator pressed. "Do you remember what you had in the bag?" Daniel replied, "I had an apron. And my box of Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading cards." The investigator, slightly confused, asked, "What? Sorry, did you say Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading cards?" Daniel confirmed, "Yes, trading cards." The card game. He thought for a moment before adding, "I might have had some food in there, but I'm not sure." At this point, the conversation shifted. The investigator said, "You've mentioned you have autism. Is that right?" Daniel replied, "Yes." The investigator asked, "What kind? How was it diagnosed?" Daniel looked down. It hasn't been classified because it was only caught later in life. I've already adjusted to it, and I haven't done any formal tests with my psychologist." Daniel continued, "I've seen a psychologist and I've been diagnosed with autism. But to be honest, I don't really know what specific level it's at. It affects some things in my everyday life," the investigator pressed. "Like what?" Daniel paused, then said, "Well, I can't tell measurements of anything. Time, objects, you name it. It's hard for me to just instinctively know." He struggled to explain further. "Like, if you asked me to do a pinch of salt, I just couldn't do it the same way twice. Even if you asked me to do 2 pinches of salt, they wouldn't be identical." He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "And if you asked me to guess your height, I wouldn't be able to. I just can't tell." The investigators seemed to absorb this, trying to understand the implications. Daniel recalled seeing Morgan while walking home, noticing that he wasn't wearing shoes. "I saw him at an ATM," Daniel said. "We spoke briefly, but it wasn't much then." The investigators showed him CCTV footage of himself standing outside a pub, looking around, and later running after Morgan. "Why were you loitering outside the pub?" they asked. "And why did you run after Morgan when he left?" Daniel shifted uneasily, his response muddled. "I don't have a great memory, especially when I'm tired," he mumbled. "But I ran after him because my mother always told me to go for a jog if I felt cold." The investigators exchanged glances, unsure if they believed him. The investigators were skeptical of Daniel's explanations. Something didn't add up. Fingerprints and DNA had been recovered from the crime scene. So they asked Daniel if he would provide his own fingerprints and DNA for cross-reference. But Daniel refused. "I never went inside Morgan's house," he insisted, "and I don't know anything about the murder with no solid proof to tie him to the crime." They let him go. Still, the police couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the right track. They were certain he was involved. There was just more to uncover. After the police interview, Daniel went to work as usual. His boss, aware of the police's visit to the Sydney cooking school, asked if they had spoken to him. Daniel quickly denied any involvement in Morgan's murder. But then, almost casually, he added, "If I had killed Morgan, the police would never find out." The chilling remark left his boss uneasy, but it seemed to go unnoticed by Daniel, who appeared strangely confident. The police, still desperate for answers, continued their investigation. Then, just days later, they received an unexpected call from Daniel. He confessed he had not been truthful during the interview and asked to meet in a car park. Intrigued and cautious, the investigators agreed. When they met, Daniel's story had changed. Now, he admitted he had entered Morgan's home, but claimed it was Morgan who invited him in. His shift in narrative raised more questions than answers. Daniel went on to describe how they entered the bedroom, where, according to him, he began to touch Morgan consensually. But then, he claimed, a woman walked in, saw them in bed together, and became enraged, attacking him. Panicking, Daniel said he fled the scene, but he implied that Morgan's death was a result of this altercation. The investigators weren't buying his story, and Daniel was quickly arrested. The police suspected Daniel was only telling part of the truth, trying to cover up the fact that they had already found his DNA at the scene. It seemed he realized it was just a matter of time before he'd be caught, forced to give up the samples they were looking for. However, there was a problem: his confession and the exchange with the investigators hadn't been recorded, raising further concerns. Back at the station, Daniel refused to speak, clamming up when they questioned him. Meanwhile, his home and the Sydney cooking school were quickly searched. It didn't take long for the police to make a chilling discovery: one of the knives was missing, and it would never be found. But the bigger break came when they found a bag in Daniel's room, the same one he'd been wearing on CCTV the night of the murder, and the same one he'd worn during his police interview. The bag was stained with blood. The blood on the bag was tested, and the results were undeniable it belonged to Morgan Huxley. This discovery meant that Daniel had walked into the police station carrying a bag soaked with his victim's blood. Further evidence linked him to the crime scene. Fingerprints were found at Morgan's home, and DNA matching Daniel's was discovered on Morgan's body. It remained unclear whether the assault occurred before or after the fatal stabbing, or perhaps both. As the investigation deepened, Daniel's computer revealed something even more disturbing: indecent images of cartoons involving minors. With this damning evidence in hand, the police had what they needed. Daniel Kelsall was formally charged with the murder of Morgan Huxley. After his arrest, Daniel was alone in the interrogation room with the investigators. It was here that he said something chillingly inappropriate. Turning to one of the officers, he remarked, "Pardon the pun, but you could cut the tension in this room with a knife." His tone was casual, almost amused, revealing a disturbing sense of pleasure in the attention he was receiving. The police soon uncovered more sinister revelations. Daniel had confessed to his therapist about his dark urges. In these private sessions, he had openly fantasized about following a random person home and killing them with a knife. With each piece of evidence falling into place, the case against Daniel grew stronger and more unsettling. Before the trial could begin, Daniel underwent a mental health assessment. As he sat down with the expert, he claimed to have autism and proceeded to list a range of symptoms. However, the expert quickly grew suspicious. There was something off about Daniel's behavior. It was almost as if he were deliberately performing, trying to convince her that he truly had autism. His delivery lacked the sincerity that would come with such a condition. The expert didn't buy his act. Instead, she concluded that Daniel had a clear understanding of right and wrong and a strong grasp of social cues. She also believed he was faking his diagnosis. Based on this assessment, Daniel was deemed fit to stand trial. The expert also described him as incredibly dangerous, a label that only solidified as the investigation progressed. It soon emerged that Daniel had tried something similar before the murder of Morgan. He had stalked another man, following him home. However, the man became aware of Daniel's presence and confronted him, forcing Daniel to retreat. After Daniel's arrest, when news outlets reported on the case, the man recognized him from the media coverage and came forward to the police. This revelation shed light on Daniel's true nature, highlighting just how dangerous he really was. The trial soon resumed. Daniel appeared to take pleasure in the proceedings, and it became increasingly clear to those in the courtroom that he was a textbook narcissist. When Daniel took the stand, he denied murdering Morgan. Recounting that fateful night, he claimed he had spoken to Morgan about his stressful week. Daniel told the court that Morgan had invited him into his home to continue their conversation. From there, the story took an odd turn. He claimed they walked into Morgan's bedroom, where he fondled him for about 10 minutes consensually, as Daniel put it, until he suddenly felt a blow to his head and noticed another person in the room. According to Daniel, this person, a woman, began to argue with Morgan. Panicking, Daniel said he quickly fled the scene. He also admitted to lying to the police about entering Morgan's home, saying he had been scared of being linked to the murder. As Daniel continued to weave his version of events, the courtroom was left in stunned silence. His lies were so brazen that they seemed to fuel his enjoyment of the discomfort he was causing. The prosecution countered his testimony with damning evidence. Morgan's blood was found on Daniel's bag, and Daniel had openly confided to his therapist about fantasizing about killing a random person. The case took another chilling turn when it was revealed that Morgan often bought his morning coffee from the cafe located in front of the Sydney Cooking School, where Daniel worked. This raised a disturbing possibility that Daniel might have been fixated on Morgan for some time before the murder. Ultimately, Daniel was convicted, sentenced to a minimum of 30 years in prison, though experts believed he would likely never be released. Such was the extent of his danger. In a separate trial, Daniel was convicted for possessing computer-generated child exploitation images. Yet, during his sentencing, the judge ruled that adding more jail time wouldn't serve any purpose for society, so his sentence remained unchanged. Reflecting on the case of Morgan Huxley, police have since stated that had Daniel not been caught, he would likely have continued killing. It appeared that Daniel used his autism as a shield, crafting a persona of an eccentric, harmless individual, one that would blend into society and deflect suspicion. His charm was deceptive. He was, in fact, a cold, calculating manipulator. Those who came into contact with him after his arrest described him as disturbingly intelligent and terrifyingly detached. Some even went as far as to say he was the most chilling person they had ever encountered.